and I just want to give you another perspective of the science of Josh, and this is work that was actually done with KU in Australia, and I only realised when I put the letters together, it's like J&J, so the T was probably as successful as Johnson & Johnson as well. My nickname was CT. However, over the entire time we knew each other, we could never agree on the spelling. When he first calls me this, it's like always just dropping the first part of my name, so it should be C-T-I-N-E. But no, Josh had his own way of spelling my name. So the story was an agitator washing machine story, which was basically came from Jack's idea initially. They both worked on oscillatory saccades in birds. Oscillatory saccades describe the rotary movement of birds' eyes. Our saccades tend to be horizontal, but birds have these horizontal saccades. They also, instead of a retinal vasculature, have this sail-like structure sitting up in the back chamber of the eye. And Jacques had this idea that maybe the two were meant to go together, that oscillating the eye like this would actually flush the nutrients that were pouring out of the pectin across the retina as a way of distributing it. And so they got the idea that they were going to go to the local hospital in Brisbane and test this idea out using fluorescein angiography, which is a technique used to look at diabetic retinopathy, where you inject fluorescein into the vein and any leaky blood vessels, the fluorescein will pour out. Well, of course, they got thrown out of the local hospital pretty quickly. No live animals were intended to go there, so they came back very disappointed. And I said, so why did you go there? We have a surgical microscope, and we have condenser lenses that I use clinically. We can just use the lab. So this was one of the most beautiful studies I ever did. Nothing to do with myopia. But what you're seeing here is the start, a view through the pupil. This was a blue book owl. This is the pectin, and that green is actually the start of the glow of the fluorescein coming out of the pectin. And we were doing this, videoing it through a surgical microscope, through a condenser lens. Josh was on the video end. Jack was actually doing the injection, and I was doing the alignment for the imaging. So it was a three-team effort. The animals or the birds had to be awake, which was a bit of a challenge, as I'll show you in a minute. But because if you anesthetize them, the oscillatory saccades would be changed. But you can see this is time-lapse, so this was more advanced. From here you can see more fluorescein coming out. And then after saccade, the fluorescein actually gets distributed across the surface of the retina. It was beautiful in the sense that every bird we looked at had a different shape pectin. So it was really a special time. We did lots of birds, and one of the attractions for Josh, I think, was the different birds. We borrowed people's pet birds, we borrowed birds from rescue stations, because this was non-invasive. The only problem was that the birds initially went yellow. If any of you in the room have had fluorescein angiography, you will know that you go this yellowish colour as if you have jaundice, correct. But what's worse than all of your body fluids that leave the body are bright yellow. So some of our bird owners were a little bit concerned about the bright yellow pouring out of the rear ends of their birds. We did a variety of animals, including the emu, and in fact the emu that we used was a baby emu brought in for another study. And to this day, I do not know whether emus have oscillatory saccades. While we were doing this study, we couldn't demonstrate oscillatory saccades. I don't know if you all know emus. They're a flightless bird. When we started off with this bird, it was about so high we could hold it. We stopped the experiment when it got to about this high, and my lab attendant, who was supposed to be holding the bird and keeping away from the feet, nearly got de-gutted when the bird pulled in its feet and thrashed down. So that was the end of our experiment. We adopted out the baby emu when it actually reached my shoulder height. So Josh and I actually had a deal that we would go to the Bronx Zoo to see if the emus have Australopithecines. We never got to do that together, but that's one of my ambitions, to actually see if I can prove that both of us will get an answer to that question. So, go to great lengths with research. They got a street named after this project of theirs. And they did get a Nature paper also. So I'm just going to close with 2 more slides. What I learned from and about Josh, some of the points have already been touched on, but I'll just step you through them again. So science is about talking and sharing, and adrenaline rushes are really good for you. So if you don't know the answer to something, find somebody who does and call them. And this one I actually first joined or started working with Josh was very foreign to me. I am not necessarily all that good even coming up to people that I don't know, but the idea of actually getting on the phone and calling somebody with expertise that I didn't know was totally foreign to me as an Australian. But Josh was insistable. Just look up, see who's doing that work, figure out a phone number and call them up, get the answer. And then internet. There's always time for more discussion. This was a bit of a problem to me when I visited in the summers. I should have missed more flights back to Australia than I did, because Josh would always think of some last point or some extra piece of data. Just look at this before you get on the shuttle or the taxi to JFK. I was saved by the bad weather more often than I care to admit. The fact that planes would be brought back to be de-iced a second time, and I would make it my flight back to Australia. One of the times that I didn't make it on the flight, I had to take a later flight, then missed my connection in LA. I ended up getting braids, and this I think was actually Josh and I had talked about this, and he dared me to go through with it. And when he did finally screw up my flight pattern, I thought, I have all day in LA waiting for a plane. I'm going to fix him. I'm actually going to do what he thinks I'm not going to do. There was some mention about grant deadlines and working really close. I was here while Josh was actually working on one of his grants, but in my memory more I actually have of ARVO abstract submissions where we actually had to take them down to the FedEx office, and it would literally, we would be within 1 minute of closing time, and if we weren't, then it was clearly the ARVO abstracts weren't well enough prepared, so there were multiple revisions, and he always found a way to get to that absolute deadline. Food and people were top priorities, and this is something that I will really miss, even though I was on the other side of the coast and not physically getting here very often. I certainly talked to Josh very regularly, and I know I can speak on behalf of Sally McFadden, who couldn't come here today, but she certainly also, when she wasn't able to come here, would Skype Josh, which he was a very reluctant user of Skype, I think, but he certainly was finally convinced that this was possible. Food was also high priority, and in fact, when I was coming here from Australia, I had a bargain with him that I was prepared to work till whatever hour at night, but the deal was that I would actually be taken to a new restaurant each time. And pretty much he could actually come up with that deal. So over the time that I was collaborating, I got to experience lots of different foods. and certainly my horizons in terms of gourmet food were dramatically expanded over those summers or your winters. Things that Josh did not know or learn. One of his early experiences in Australia where he did a short sabbatical, he came in back from lunch that he'd had with Jack one day when I was actually sitting at a surgical microscope doing some serious surgery because I did my PhD part-time, so I had 2 days a week in Jack's lab. So Josh comes in with this box, a present for me, and I'm sitting, I just look up, so what is this? And he said, oh, I've got a present, this is something special. So I just move my head away from the microscope. Josh opens this box literally inches from my nose, and there is a stick insect that is about 12 inches long in this box, which Josh thought was fabulous, fascinating. He did not know that not everybody likes stick insects, including me, I have a phobia. And so I nearly knocked the surgical microscope over as I flew out of the chair. I shrieked. Josh didn't know what he had done. But I think he still wasn't really sure what it was about stick insects that I did not like. And I'm not sure that he then just concluded I was the abnormality. There are more people than me that don't like it. And the final thing, and this goes to sort of his procrastination and deadlines a bit, another visit that he had to Australia. He wanted to go out to dinner with a group of people from Jack Hughes' unit, and it was early in the week, which is extra deadly, and I said, Josh, if we're going to eat, we need to be out of the lab by 8 o'clock, or there will be no restaurants. We will not be eating, full stop. He had, again, little jobs to do, little jobs to do, little jobs to do. We finally were left to choice of N equals 1 restaurant after trying many different restaurants. One agreed to feed us. By the time dessert came, we actually had to put our feet up off the floor while they mopped underneath the table. And that was the price for them actually feeding us that night. So I'm not sure that Josh really ever got that, but there are actually real deadlines sometimes. But I have some very fond memories of Josh, and I still find in situations where I think, well, what would have Josh done? He's not at the end of the phone anymore to call, but I think he certainly lives on in my life, as I'm sure